The past few weeks have been amazing. It's been great to just learn with all of you and think about the urban, various facets of the urban together. It's been amazing listening to you. And it's been very encouraging for us to have had such an interested bunch of participants, a very diverse cohort. And thanks for, ditching your weekend plans. Thanks for sticking with us till the end, for your questions, your comments, your feedback. We will share another feedback form with you. We will circulate it via email, and we will request you to kindly fill it up and send it to us. Also, your course completion certificates will be emailed to you by the end of next week. Without further ado, let's move on to the valedictory lecture of our course, which will be delivered by Professor Filip de Boeck. To introduce him, Professor Filip de Boeck is a professor of social and cultural anthropology at the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of Leuven, Belgium. A writer, filmmaker, and curator, Professor Boeck is actively involved in teaching, promoting, coordinating, and supervising research in and on Africa. He is a board member of PICHA, a Lubumbashi-based art and research center, and a fellow of the Humanities Urban Future Program of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CIFAR. Professor Boeck's research interests include youth and the politics of culture, urban infrastructure, and the transformation of public and private space in the urban context in Africa. Co-authored with photographer Sami Baloji, his most recent book is The Frontier Files, Life Along the Congo-Angola Border, published in 2025. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
Many, many thanks for the kind invitation. I hope you can hear me well. Just one correction, that last book has not been published yet. The Frontier Files, it will be published by the end of this year, hopefully with Duke University Press, but I'm currently working on it. And I would have loved to present something about it, but it has nothing to do with urbanity and the urban, so I'm falling back on all the work, I'm afraid. So I'll try to stick to the time that is given to me. If I'm too long, don't hesitate to cut me off. I'm very often a bit like a diesel motor. It takes some time to warm up, but then once the engine starts going, I don't know how to stop anymore. So I send you an article positing the polis. I don't know if you have had the chance to read through it, but that article was further developed in a chapter that was published in the book that you see on the right, Grammars of the Urban Ground, edited by Ash Amin and Michele Lancione. And I will basically build my presentation for today on that, on these two texts. For those of you who are not familiar, perhaps, with the Congolese context that I'm speaking of about, so I will be talking about Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which sits very centrally in the continent of Africa. It's itself a huge country, and Kinshasa is also a huge city, comparable in size to Kolkata, I think. I think Kinshasa counts 18 million inhabitants today, and it is sitting here on the left bank of this black snake that you see, the Congo River, and at some point in its course it turns into a large inner sea. Basically, it's almost a sea-like lake pool, and on the left bank, the gray that you see here is all of that is Kinshasa, spreading towards the east and towards the south. On the other side of the river is the baby capital of the other Congo, Brazzaville, that you see here, a far smaller town, but these are the two capitals in the world that probably are closest to each other. They're only divided by the Congo River stream. So in the text that I send you, I explore how local tropes of the whole and of suturing and suture, and I will tell you more about it later on, how these tropes tell us something about the changes that have taken place in how urbanity is imagined and lived in Congo today. And what I propose in these texts is that the figure of the whole offers a kind of topographical meta concept that Congo's urban residents use to not only to reflect upon the material degradation of their city's infrastructure. A large part of the city was constructed in colonial times. Congo was a Belgian colony until between 1908 and 1960. And after 1960, after independence, formal urban planning in a way stopped. So the backbone, infrastructural backbone of the city dates back to the 1950s and is really by now falling apart. So people use the concept of whole to talk about that degradation, but also to rework the closures and the often dismal quality of social life that has followed in the wake of that material ruination of the colonial city. And so what I'll try to do is to offer a way to understand exactly how these tropes are being exploited and used to rework and reassemble the city, and what attempts are being made to fill the post-colonial hole, let's say, and what possible answers urban residents come up with in response to the challenge that the whole poses, in a way. But before going there, I would like to start with a more common trope, and to start with a colonial figure. This guy, who is a Danish man, who became in 1898 embarked as a very young man on a ship. This is District Commissioner Søren Sørensen. And in 1921, after service in the colonial army of King Leopold II, he stayed in Congo after 1908, when Congo became the Belgian Congo, and embarked on a very long and successful career as a colonial administrator. And at the end of his career, he sits on in his trading outpost overlooking the river, and writing a letter to a friend in Denmark. And this man was an explorer. He became famous for having discovered the mountain that you see here in the back on the left, which is for many decades was called Mount Sørensen. He discovered this mountain and he officially baptized it. And looking back on his career and looking back on the discoveries of this mountain, it is the figure of the mountain that also comes to his mind to describe his work and his life in Belgian Congo. And in that letter to his friend in Denmark, he writes the text that you see here, as Erasmus Montanus says, and Erasmus Montanus is a reference to a satirical play from the 18th century, written by a Danish playwright, about a man called Rasmus Boeck. Boeck in Danish is mountain, and he's a kind of a country bumpkin. His parents sent him to Copenhagen, to the capital, where he goes to school at the university. He learns Latin. He Latinizes his name. It becomes Erasmus Montanus, and then he returns to the village and insists on speaking Latin with his parents, and who are simple country folk. And so Sørensen reminds us of that person, and he says, as Montanus says, we now have some folk here on the mountain. The big world company Lever Brothers has established a big oil mill at the confluence of two rivers in Congo, and there are whites working there. It's a very big business, and it's odd for an old Congo hand like me to see smoking chimneys here in our silent jungle, to hear the sound of the machines, and to see the white light beaming into the night. It is like an adventure. So it's not by coincidence that he evokes this figure of the mountain because mountains are the colonial image of the mountain is of course symbolizes the panoptical authoritarianism of the colonial state, and its vertical dimension also formed the perfect illustration of the ambitious dreams of colonialist modernity. And very quickly the mountains around Kinshasa, for example, that became the places where the colonizer established himself first. That figure of that mountain was turned into another vertical figure, that of the skyscraper. I refer to a text by Tim Ingold. In the contemporary world, the skyscraper model has come to dominate the way in which mountains, particularly of a more iconic or spectacular kind, have come to figure in the popular imagination. The Belgian colonizer was actually very proud when this building came up in 1946. It was Central Africa's first high-rise building, 12 stories high, and it epitomized colonialism's triumph to such an extent that after independence, under Mobutu, the Mobutist state copied this model and constructed another skyscraper alongside the old colonial one, called the Sosacom Tower, and which was higher and more imposing than its colonial predecessor, and became the city's new landmark. It symbolized the triumph of post-independence Zairian nationalism. And so that image of the skyscraper, or the vertical infrastructure of the city, continues to be recycled, by the Congolese government. This, for example, is a building that was recently constructed in Lubumbashi, another city in Congo, and it was a gift of the former President Kabila to the inhabitants of that city, called hypnosis. So it hypnotizes the population, this new kind of modernist infrastructure with its aspirations of insertion into a more modern global world. It also continues to inspire urban inhabitants themselves. I did a lot of work on this building, for example, another high-rise building that was completely self-built, self-constructed by someone in Kinshasa. It's also 12 stories high, and it is a bit of a symbol of this kind of informal and self-constructed city that actually makes up the horizon of urban life, rather than these new shiny modernist or global southern urban models. So even if Congo continues to be hypnotized and mesmerized by the skyscraper aesthetics, the raw urgencies of life and stand in sharp contrast to the promises of the government that, for example, in 2006 started to run a program, the 5 public works, the 5 chantiers. Later, it was reworked into the revolution of modernity. That was the governmental program to an overhaul urban infrastructure and promising new shiny cities in place of the existing ones. Of course, these cities were never constructed in reality, and in reality there is a large gap between these official urban planning projects and the reality of everyday lives in the shadow of these colonial and post-colonial towers. The only vertical constructions that you see in the city today are the heaps of garbage that is not fetched by the urban authorities, and is in a way a topos that is opposite the one of verticality. It's the topos of the whole, of erosions that make up a large part of the urban landscape in which people live. So that whole kind of vertical notion that that modernity promised, actually dives down into the underground of the city where real city life happens, inverting the upward verticality of the modern city into a downward vertical noir, you can say, as Stephen Graham has called it, ripping open the covered asphalted surface of the modern city to reveal a different kind of urban plane. And that plane is no longer the stable, steady, impenetrable, and leveled horizontality of the modernist urban ground, but instead it opens up a much more bumpy and incoherent landscape. And that is what I, in my work, have been exploring now for many, many years, following also the lead of someone like Achille Mbembe and Sarah Nuttall, who in their 2008 book on Johannesburg, the elusive metropolis, state that it is actually the dialectics between the surface, the underground, and the edge that characterizes African urban modernity. These are the spaces that one has to look at and to understand in order to figure out what urban living in this kind of post-colonial African context means. And so, in their attempts to make sense of their daily struggles in the city, Congo citizens have long turned away from the mountain, away from the tower as aspirational, future-oriented figures, to refer to the opposite topographical figure of the whole. And the whole is called in Lingala, the lingua franca of Congolese capital, is called Libulu, the whole. And that whole has become, in a way, a local conceptual figure, a master trope to express the very dismal quality of urban life and to define the dreary place that the city has become for many. And so the notion of the whole may refer to physical holes, it may refer to erosion points, and since Kinshasa and many other cities in Congo are constructed on very sandy hills, with every torrential rain during the rainy season, these erosions open up and create large ravines that swallow houses and cars and people. There are hundreds of these erosion points in Kinshasa at the moment, but the whole may also refer to potholes that I consider to be a kind of generic infrastructure of the city. I'll explain that in a minute. So the figure of the whole is also used to talk about the informal economy. Here you see a picture of a small informal marketplace, and the market is like a hole in which that you enter in the hope of coming out of that hole with something edible, for example, something that you find in the market. So that again punctuates the extractive landscapes of the city, not only in terms of its economy, also in terms of its management of death. There are informal cemeteries all over the place. People are hastily buried. Their graves disappear after a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So that too is a kind of hole that is very present. And so the concept of the whole does not only refers to these very physical, tangible depressions on the city's surface, but it's also more than that. It talks to the black hole of urban living itself, the dark matter of the urban praxis itself. And whole, and in my work, I also refer to the writings of Sonny Lagoutancy, who is a fantastic writer. For those of you who have not read his work, some of it is translated into English. A playwright, a poet, a novelist, who unfortunately died in 1995 due to, as he was an AIDS victim. But his very first play, that was never performed and never published during his lifetime, is called Le Trou, the Hole, in which he talks about the whole as a kind of a kind of concept to capture life in the urban context of the two Congos, Brazzaville and Kinshasa. And so he uses the whole as a metaphor to describe all of the shady deals that that one has to make in order to survive in the city's informal economy, all of the impromptu movements into often uncharted spatial and social and mental territory that the city obliges people to make. Whole signifies the city's non-theological time frame. It signifies the pitfalls of its religious ideologies, the trap of its very often very treacherous sociabilities, and the very real and tangible danger that emanates from corporeal holes and orifices in a specific kind of ludic urban sexuality and the nightlife that Kinshasa is known for, and that is very well described in this other beautiful novel, Tram 83, by a young Congolese novelist called Fiston Mwanza Munjila. This is an English translation of that novel. He was shortlisted for the Booker Prize a couple of years ago, and he describes the whole story is set in a bar called Tram 83, and it talks a lot about sexual pleasure and the oniric atmosphere that goes with it. So holes have become, in that sense, and so the whole is really has become a kind of generic name for bars and nightclubs all over the city of Kinshasa. Grand Libulu, the Big Hole. This is the name of a famous bar in somewhere in Kinshasa. And so holes have become the symptom and metaphor for maybe an experience of loss. An experience of loss that is simultaneously material and moral. Erosion itself signifies not only the city's physical decline, but it also informs discourses about the corrosion of wealth and of values. This is an excerpt from a doctoral dissertation by Joshua Walker, an American anthropologist who worked in another city that is characterized by the whole, namely the diamond mining town of Buji-Mayi in central Congo. And so how can we think about holes both as material presences, but also to talk about the corrosion of wealth and values, about moral corrosion in a way. In one brief passage, in Henri Lefebvre's The Right to the City, that famous book, Lefebvre also reflects upon the metaphor of the whole when he writes about, of course, a very different kind of urban world, but in terms that seem easily and very literally translatable to the kind of urban experience one encounters in Kinshasa and other cities of the African global south. He writes, and you can read it here with me, the destructuration of the city manifests the death of phenomena of social and cultural disintegration. Considered as a whole, this society finds itself incomplete. Between systems and structures consolidated by various means, there are holes and chasms, he says. These voids are not there due to chance, they are the places of the possible. They contain the floating and dispersed elements of the possible, but not the power which could assemble them. And I find that a very interesting statement. So how can holes and gaps and voids, how can these be also places of the possible? What kind of possibility lurks inside them? And so what Lefebvre touches upon here is not only the danger of understanding hole, chasm, void solely in terms of incompleteness, in terms of destructuration, but he says we also have to look at these holes as places of possibility. And discourses of holes are problematic if they only suggest that urban existence is defined by depletion, as if these holes were not in and of themselves productive in any sense besides the depletive. And this is what I often find in the Congolese context. I show this picture here. I hope you can see it. And on that house is written in paint that is already peeling off. It says, "L'impossible n'est pas congolais." The impossible is not Congolese. So that means inside every impossibility that you are confronted with in urban life, but every impossibility also harbors a possibility. There's always a possibility inside the impossibility. Dwelling in the space of the gap, you can say, always leaves room for maneuver, this seems to say. Holes and gaps in the order of things have the capacity to, metaphorically, elide how life continues through and despite decline. The whole itself always also offers an opening, an aperture, or, as Lefebvre notes, a possibility, at least for those who know how to read meaning into the blackness of the whole, how to illuminate, in a way, the whole, as Kinshasa residents themselves say. When we live in the city, we have to know how to illuminer le trou, how to illuminate the whole, how to make the blackness, turn it into light, in a way. You have to possess the sentient experience to inhabit and to negotiate this dynamic, metabolic urban environment and read an alternative meaning into the gravity of its apparent blackness. So in the remainder of my presentation, I'm going to set out to explore what exactly may be the kind of floating and dispersed elements of the possible that Lefebvre is referring to. What are these floating and dispersed elements that lay hidden inside the whole, inside this urban site, the inhabitants of which often repeat that the impossible is not Congolese. As an illustration of this of this line of thinking, I turn to David Graeber, who in a 2012 TEDx talk that he gave introduced to talk about bullshit jobs. You know that work, that book by David Graeber. He introduced the analogy of digging a hole and filling it back over and over. A method, he said, used in some Soviet gulags as a form of torture to drive people crazy. And later in an interview, Graeber explained that his example of backyard digging was inspired by Dostoevsky, a quote from Dostoevsky, who, while in prison camp, said that if you wanted to destroy someone psychologically, have them move a rock to the one side of the road and move it back again over and over and over again, or fill pitchers of water continuously, have them perform something meaningless, and they will do anything to make it stop. Now, if you come to think of that, and you transfer that to the context of Kinshasa, I think it's very doubtful whether Kinshasa's residents would agree with either Dostoevsky or Graeber on this point. Usually, I would say elements such as potholes, and you see some of them here, are seen as infrastructural failures. We think of potholes as something that needs repair. We do not tend to think of them as constructive elements in the city. Yet, as car drivers, for example, in places such as Kinshasa, it might well be the same in Calcutta, for all I know. As car drivers know very well, it's the way in which potholes function everywhere in the city as a kind of constructive element, turning the whole into a resource. If you see these potholes and you drive by in a car, there's always people with a shovel filling them up during the day, and then they stop you when you pass by in your car and you give them a little something, because they're the ones who make your mobility possible, and you reward them for that. But if you would return to the very same pothole at night, you would notice that the same people that are repairing the road during the day are emptying the sand that they put into it during the day, emptying it again at night so that they can restart all over again the next day, because the pothole is their income. And so the question is not how to repair the road, but how to become, in a way, the owner of a profitable pothole where many cars in the street, where many cars pass. And the same goes for police officers that are always stopping cars in front of a pothole and making the slowing down of your mobility, turning that into an opportunity to ask for money. And if they do not come back in the evening to their headquarters and with a certain amount of money to give to their commander, they will be taken off this profitable spot in the street and sent to a street where no cars pass, and so where they will not make income. So the pothole then becomes something to hang on to. It becomes a site of struggle over the propriety of a profitable pothole, and the pothole in itself becomes also an actor in urban life. The picture on the left here, you see a road that is potholed and full of mud and water, caused by a broken pipe, a drainage pipe from this building that you see. And people never repair it. And I was always wondering, why don't they repair this road? Because it really obliges people to leave their car behind in front of the building. Where there is a police office, you have to pay the police officer to park your car, and then you have to continue on foot. And this is very early in the morning. You see some market stalls here, and soon women, most likely the wives and the daughters of the policemen and others who live in this building. It's a squatted building. It's an official public ministerial building, but that is squatted by at least 300 families now. They set up their stall here because it is the mud and the pothole that pushes passers-by to the side, and so it's the mud hole that creates publics of buyers for these market women. So the pothole thickens and creates a publics on which these women depend to make a living. And so the pothole then becomes a kind of a constructive infrastructure, in a way, of a city life in and of itself. And so I refer to these holes as what I call points of suture, literally or figuratively. Holes provide a livelihood for a multiplicity of urban actors, and very often actors that are disenfranchised, who live a life full of holes, but the hole in itself becomes a conceptual tool, good for thinking through the many experiences of lack and loss, while also becoming a metaphor for a fissure, an opening, as I said, an opportunity. And so therefore, the whole becomes, in a way, in my understanding, the baseline and the ground zero of this urban post-colonial world, in which it also presents itself as a suture. And I take that notion from, for example, the American Africanist historian Nancy Rose Hunt, who wrote this little book about colonial medical histories in Congo and suturing new medical histories of Africa. And in that book, she argues that suture suggests closing a wound, of course, or making an incision, stitching together parts, locations, and points of view. So as such, it also points to new kinds of creativity with temporalities, with sources, with evidence, with interactivity. And that's an idea that I took and developed in this book, Suturing the City, that I made with a Congolese collaborator, visual artist, Sami Balogi. And in which we picked up on this idea of the suture and extended that notion of suture as closure and junction and seam, and comparing it to the way in which, often against all odds, the inhabitants of Congo's urban landscapes read meaning into the black hole of the city, so to speak, the way in which they concretize the metaphor into matter, and vice versa, by using not only material but also mental and moral holes, you can say, as suturing points to fill the gaps, to overcome the hiatus, to design realignments, and thereby, in a way, redefine zero, that is the impossible circumstances of living in this kind of urban environment, to redesign that zero into a possibility, into a something else, into a surplus. And in that sense, the notion of suture, as I use it, also remains close to how one of Jacques Lacan's disciples, Jacques-Alain Miller, who first introduced the concept in Lacanian psychoanalysis, how he originally interpreted that notion of suture. For him, suture is always between the zero as a lack, as something impossible to conceptualize, and the zero as a presence, as a number. So therefore as a one. So the zero is either this, it's nothing, or it is a presence, it is a figure. And it is in that sense that the whole, as suture, both represents lack, while also in a way placing or suturing it. And so differently put, you can say the zero or the void of a situation is the suture to its own being. The void itself is, as Badiou says, is subtractive suture to being, while the zero number is the suturing stand-in for the lack. In a short text that accompanied a book by my photographer friend Sami Balogi, in a short text on artisanal miners in a mining town in Congo, Kolwezi, Achille Mbembe wrote an introductory text and also refers to the zero's potential to reformulate lack in a way. He says, in the zero world, neither the material nor life come to an absolute end. It's never a social terminus. They do not become nothing. They simply move on towards something else. And in every case, the end is deferred and the question of finiteness remains unanswered. So that is the notion that I've tried to work with and to come up with. Also, inspired by other artistic Congolese interventions, choreographies, for example, in which bodies in dance are used to reassemble spaces and to give them an alternative order. And so, from that notion of the whole and its openings, its possibilities, how can we from there move on to something else? And I think what is important to capture and understand is how, in a way, residents always do exactly that, how they move on, how they manage, with varying degrees of success, to move on towards something else by turning the zero into a one. How they manage to read potential, promise, and prospect into the blackness of the whole, and how they throw themselves, their words, and very often also their own bodies, in a way, into this daily struggle to overcome the city's conundrums and suture its contrarieties, and how it is the gravity of the whole itself, the inhabitability of the urban environment that propels them to do that. And amongst those who best know how to realize these Lefebvrean conditions of the possible that lay dormant in voids and gaps, as he noticed, Lefebvre himself, in The Ride to the City, points to artists. He points to the capacity of art to bring to the realization of urban society It's a long meditation on life as drama and pleasure, and I quote from Lefebvre now. He says, as much as the science of the city, art and the history of art are part of a meditation on the urban, which wants to make efficient the images which proclaim it. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I'm also a member of an independent grassroots, let's say, art and research center called Picha. So I really enjoy working with very often unschooled young artists of all kinds, making video, making painting, filming, writing, and so on. And through that association, I get in touch with a lot of them, and I see how these Congolese artists are especially apt at exploring, in a way, the negative space of the whole, at teasing out the whole's potential, at inventing new vocabularies that bypass also the tired, institutionalized development rhetorics that is still so often used by the state, but to no avail. And instead, they highlight the possibility for action, for what I would call incremental suturing from the ground up that wholes generate. And some recent examples of how this new generation of Congolese artists uses the notion of the whole to curate and to reimagine the city and its public spaces along novel lines, to express and give form to a more inclusive notion of urban recognition and transformation away from and radically different, radically opposed to the corrupted spaces of institutionalized politics. Some recent examples are, for example, the work by the man you see here, Philippe Katembo, a fantastic photographer who also died far too young in 2015, and directly linked to the work that he was making. This man photographed potholes in filled with rainwater in Kinshasa streets, and so he filmed the reflection of the city in these potholes, then turned that picture upside down. And so what you see is an image that is actually not an image of the real city, but that is an image of the reflection of the city in these potholes. And so, playing on on the kind of urban imaginary, on the notion of imaging, reflection, mirroring, and so on, to conjure up the city as a kind of also a mental state of mind, with a direct activist dimension to it too, because he used that work to express his anger at the dismal state of the streets of Kinshasa, and unfortunately hanging around these potholes filled with rainwater where mosquitoes lay their eggs. He also died of a cerebral malaria that he caught while doing that work, and that caused his death. But so this kind of work literally works around holes and tries to turn these holes into images of a different kind of urbanity. And to finish my presentation, I will also want to refer to the work of Patti Chindele, who is mainly a painter, a contemporary painter, but who also engages in performance art. And there is a link. The link that you see there is a link to one of his performances. You see a picture here. The performance consisted of him sitting himself in the middle of a very busy avenue, a main street in central Kinshasa, but the street filled with very deep and big potholes. Again, filled with the water of the rain. And sitting there, taking out a fishing rod and starting to fish in throwing his fishing rod, in throwing it out into the pothole. And so immediately, hundreds of people that passed by in cars, on foot, and so on, gathered around that hole, gathered around him to ask, well, what is this man doing? And all he was doing was, in a way, hoping for to catch a fish, hoping to catch something out of the hole, in a way. And that is again an example of how the hole is used to let's say, curate or reimagine the city and its public spaces along these new and novel lines. I think I didn't keep time, but I think I've spoken my 45 minutes so far, so I might end it here, and I will stop sharing the screen. Can I do that? Or does someone have to do that for me?
Thank you, Professor. That was that was so interesting. I think it leaves us with a lot to think about. It is a very fitting end to our course, I think. Paras has a question.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was really interesting talk. And while you were talking about pit holes, I was wondering, like in many cities of India, there are also like pit holes, and every time there are elections and the political parties would come and then say, we will fill up this, we will build the roads, and it never happens. And I was wondering that if it's like in the city, Kansas, if there's any like connection or link, because you were mentioning that people never repair it, right? These pit holes, and these are also sites of struggles, profits. I was wondering if you could talk about how it is connected to state or political parties or elections. I do not have much information or knowledge about the political systems and electoral, but that would also be interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that question. First of all, yes, it's true that that notion of the whole, you can apply it not only to Congolese urban settings, but I guess also to urban settings elsewhere in the world. And I know, for example, that a lot of work is taking off from my own work in Kinshasa. That notion of the whole is also used by someone like, I forget his first name now, Solomon, on holes in Delhi. And particularly talking about potholes in the street and car accidents and accidents by motorcycle drivers. So he also works with that notion of the whole to talk about the context of Delhi, for example. Now, the political context between India and Congo is rather different, I would think. Of course, there were the 50 years of Belgian colonial presence until 1960, then a period of what is generally known as the Congo crisis, 5 years of UN Blue Helmet interventions, a large war, the country that was falling apart and so on, until in 1965, Mobutu Sese Seko grabbed power. And the Mobutist regime lasted for from then 1965 until 1997, so more than 3 decades of a very authoritarian dictatorial regime that really brought the country to its knees and caused not only a huge political crisis, but especially also a deep economic crisis from which the country until today has never recovered. And then after Mobutu was ousted in 1997, he died a couple of months later in exile in Morocco. The regime was taken over by Laurent Désiré Kabila, who was then became engaged in what often referred to as the Third World War, because it implicated not only Congo but also Rwanda, Uganda, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and so on. It became a kind of large Central African war that was mainly ended after his assassination in 2001. Then his son Joseph Kabila took over until 2019. So in 40, 50 years of time, there were 3 rulers, and all 3 had the same dictatorial, autocratic tendencies, let's say. And so that makes that the state, on the one hand, is that. At the same time, it's a very dysfunctional state. You can say in Congo there's a lot of nation. People believe very strongly in the idea of the Congolese nation, in the idea of their Congolese national identity, but with a very dysfunctional state. So lots of nation and a state that is not very performant. And there's actually only one actor amongst many. The state is not the instance that monopolizes, for example, what the definition of the public sphere, or the definition of what public space in the city, or citizenship itself means. There are many other actors that are involved and that are in constant negotiation with each other. So in terms of urban policies, quite frankly, I think the urban authorities of Kinshasa couldn't care less about the well-being of their citizens. There is a small political elite that is super wealthy, and then the rest, a vast mass of not poor, it's not working class, and the class analysis doesn't really work very well to explain this kind of society, because apart from that tiny political and economic elite, the rest of Congo's population is a precariat. It's a pauperized population that mentally aspires to a kind of middle class life, but materially cannot manage that, and gets stuck into this kind of endless precariat. One of the tragedies, perhaps, of this kind of urban condition is that the middle class is largely absent, and that is an absence that was created also by these dictatorial regimes, because they always feared that the middle class would become a voice for political opposition against the regime. And so it was made sure that the middle class consisted of basically expatriate presences. In colonial times, these were Greeks and Portuguese. After the end of colonialism and during independence, the Greeks and the Portuguese were turned out by Mobutu in the 1970s. They were replaced by Lebanese, by later on today a lot by Pakistani, also Indian, large Indian presence, and by increasingly also a Chinese and Asian presence. But that is those people constitute a kind of middle class. The merchants, small commerce, and so on is very often not in the hands of Congolese, and so who are excluded from these spaces. And so the whole image of newly emerging cities, fashioned after the urban aesthetics of the Pearl River Delta in China, or Mumbai, or Abu Dhabi, or Dubai, and so on, remains a chimera, because these cities are supposedly built for these rising upper middle classes that remain very often very chimeric, that are not actually there. They are hypothetical, but they do not exist in reality. And so there is a large gap to answer your question, a large gap between that official political discourse, a very centralized state apparatus, and the actual life and daily experience of people on the ground.
The next question is from Munaza.
So when we talk about city, especially I am a very early career urban researcher, and I work in the city of Srinagar. When I look at my city in that sense, there is a lot of, because it's a very precarious geopolitically, it's environmentally fragile. And what you see that there isn't much for youth to reclaim their cities, in a sense that it's highly securitized. The commons are highly securitized. As such, what we do is our publics or our public space becomes very constrained, very restricted, and we're also highly surveyed. In that sense, how does reclamation to a city looks like? And this is something that I've been thinking about. How does it look like, especially since the civic participation or any kind of participation with the government or with any decision makers is very, very tedious. So still, when you're working as a researcher, when you're working in the field, when you're trying to work with the community, how do you, get connected to the city when you're always being seen or heard in that sense? I hope I made sense.
So I hope I understand. You were very hard to understand, but so. So part of the question was about, I mean, the policing, the controlling of urban space, and the fact that it leaves little space for youth. Was that it?
Yeah, it leaves a little space for anyone to actually engage with city in that sense, and every engagement of city becomes a very state decided engagement in that sense. So in that sense, how do we actually reconcile with the idea of claiming the city when you know that it's very, you have to be very careful?
Yes, well, maybe in the context of Kinshasa that I'm talking about, and more generally perhaps Congo, as I just said in my previous response, the state lacks the capacity of or the monopoly to control, define the public sphere. The urban authorities of Kinshasa lack the capacity to engage in whatever kind of urban politics is needed for the city. So this city that is grown from 400,000 in 1960 without any formal urban planning to 18 to 20 million people today has really outgrown any form of possibility of formal management of the urban. So in that sense, the city is also a space that is where the state has retreated, and large parts of the city are not covered or not cared for by the state. The state is present perhaps in the form of a policeman or a soldier who comes knocking at your door at night to loot your house, but that is about it. And so there, again, there's a lot of the citizens are used to fence for themselves and not to rely on the state, because the state has never been capable of playing that role, and nobody turns towards them to solve whatever problem it is that they have at hand. And that is also due, and then your dimension of youth becomes interesting. Kinshasa today, I don't know for Kolkata, but Kinshasa today, let's say 18 million people, 80% of these 18 million are not part of a formal salaried economy. So they are part of, they have to make do, they have to engage in informal economic practices to survive. And 75% of these 18 million are under the age of 25. So you have an enormous amount of young people, very often people who do not have a formal right to the city, who do not have a formal entrance to schooling, to education, to salaries, to the job economies, and so on. So people who are also left all by themselves and have to fence for themselves. And so I've said that class, for example, is not a good way to read the tensions and the frictions and within the city. But on the other hand, generation is the state, or this vast amount of young people turns against figures of authority, of gerontocratic authority, their own elders, the heads of families, uncles, but also every figure that represents a kind of authority, be it the governor of the city, politicians, preachers, pastors, the president himself. So that youth is really is full of anger, and but it's an anger that does rarely or seldomly translate into a kind of institutionalized political strategy. When young people mobilize themselves, for example, when someone dies, and given the demographics of the city, very often it's very young people who die, and the median age in Congo is 15, I think, and life expectancy for a man is under 50, and for a woman slightly higher. But so a lot of young people die, and every time that becomes a moment for effervescent and very violent moment of upheaval, in which these young people literally kidnap the body of their dead friend, boy or girl, and carry out the burial. So the family loses control, the state loses control over burials in cemeteries that are taken over by these angry young people who, during these burials, chant, sing against elders who they say have sacrificed that urban youth and have eaten them. And they use a discourse of witchcraft to express themselves. And but once the funeral is over and these emotions have been expressed and so on, then it kind of disappears again. So it never coagulates into a kind of formal political. It is more a kind of a politics of occupation. You take your body. And we know of the Occupy movements in Manhattan and so on. Occupation in a very literal sense. You have that body that is yours. It's the only thing that basically you're sure of to have and to own, and that you put into a spot and space and say, this is my place, and here I stake my claim to live in the city. And so it's before any official or institutionalized political demand, it is the expression of a politics of presence. And occupatio, as we know from Hannah Arendt also, public presence has to do with knowing how to speak, to express yourself in public space, and to make yourself visible in public space. And that is what these young people are doing against the state, saying you cannot chase us off, you cannot just ignore us. We are here and you have to take us into account. But from there to move on to a kind of Arab Spring movement where people take into the street in a kind of more formalized and organized political moment of resistance and rebellion in a way, that is a move that rarely happens, because people cannot afford to occupy the street and take to the street and occupy a Tahrir Square, for example, for more than a couple of days, because after 2-3 days they starve. They have to look, they have to start moving again to search for something to eat and to stay alive. And that is every time also what the authorities, the powers in place count on, and that whatever protests they are, that they are quickly they sizzle out, because people cannot afford to stay to stay out of their informal survival economies for more than a couple of days. I don't know whether that answers your question, but
yeah, thank you for putting it so nicely.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Professor Paula Banerjee. Ma'am,
Yes.
could you please unmute? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Filip, can you hear me?
exactly.
I have
Loud
a
and clear.
slightly contentious question, and that is, you were talking about two imageries. One is a very phallic symbol of a skyscraper, and the other imagery is again a very, sexual symbol for women, a hole. Yet throughout your lecture, you did not mention the word sexuality, and you did talk about male and female bodies, but you never talked about gender. I would like to know why.
I could have, of course, and everything that I just mentioned is these youth moments of rebellion. Those who participate in that are both young men and young women. So gender is a specific connotation in this urban context, and you have to go back to the colonial context to understand that. When the city was constructed, it was a masculine space for a very long time. Not only was it constructed by the Belgian colonial administration as a very segregated space in terms of race. The heart of the city was called the city, La Ville, and the peripheral city around it was the urban space that was relegated to African labor force, basically. And so a peripheral city was called Cité. So you had a dual city, a black and a white city, and there was a real racial color bar that was installed, and that still continues to exist in a way. But alongside that segregation, there was a gender segregation until at least 1945, the end of the Second World War. The people of the colonial administration that were there were Belgian white men. Their wives, their families, their kids stayed in the metropole, and only now, after 1945, did they start up a policy in which families, wives, and children joined their husbands in the colony. And on the African side, the same thing. Before 1945, very few women were actually allowed to live in the city, and those who were allowed to live in the city were called free women. But that freedom came. There was a specific administrative piece of paper that they needed in order to be able to live in the city, and these free women were prostitutes that had to cater towards all of these male African workers that were populating the city. So the city grew as a very masculinist and masculine space. And that is still, to some extent, very often the case. There is a big divide between public and private. The public space that is still very dominated by the male voice. I mean, this week we have the International Women's Day. In Congo, it always makes me laugh, because that means that for one day on radio, on television, you hear all these Congolese male elders address their wives, their sisters, their daughters, and tell them how to behave and so on. So that is the National Women's Day, the Congolese way. It is male elders, male gerontocratic authority preaching against women and telling them what they are allowed to do and not to do. So that remains a very there is a lot of toxic masculinity in a way that continues to structure the city in that respect. On the other hand, I mean, if the whole refers to the world of informal economies and informality and so on, that informality, of course, is much better mastered and managed by not only youth, who are far more streetwise than their male elders, who very often are nominally the heads of households and so on, but they are jobless, they sit at home, they are useless in a way. And young men and women know how to navigate that informal economy far better. They thrive in it far better. And that is also the case for mothers and for housewives, who they are the ones who know how to make some money in the market space. They are the ones to work, to till the land and have vegetable gardens in the city. They are the ones who provide food for their families. So there has been a real switch, in very real terms, away from male gerontocratic authority. These older models, I mean, gender models continue somehow to exist, but at the same time, there has been a real switch away from that towards a kind of social and economic power of youth and of women and mothers, and that has come with a backlash. That also means that elders, and especially male elders, have started witchcraft accusations, just like the young accuse their elders of being witches and of eating them and sacrificing them. The elders accuse their own children and grandchildren of eating them, of posing literally a kind of occult threat and killing them by witchcraft. So there is this kind of intergenerational transmission that has gone awry, that poses a real problem, and that makes of the city a kind of intergenerational battlefield. And so the struggle, the tension is between generations, far less between male-female gender oppositions, I think. Although, as I said, these gender oppositions continue to play a role as well.
Filip, I'm enormously glad that you explained this, because my question stemmed from the fact that I have contacts who are working in Kinshasa, women, and some of the protests that they have engaged in is because they feel that they also have to reclaim the city for themselves, not just for the men. And their sexuality plays a very important part. So that's why I'm so glad you explained this, and that's the reason why I asked the question. Thank you.
And I did briefly refer to sexuality in reference to the novel by Fiston Mangila, Tram 83, that is played out in a bar. And the protagonists are two men, but they're in constant dialogue and discourse with a number of female prostitutes working in that space. And there too you see very well how that gender dynamics is played out, and how these women on the one hand are of course exploited and sexually abused and so on, and on the other hand also use their own sexuality as a weapon and turn it against these men and use it in different kinds of ways. So that novel, in a way, addresses that gender problematics also very well.
Also, this gender relationship came out also to an extent during the AIDS crisis, because these women said they're absolutely powerless to make men wear condoms. So that's from where my conversations with them started. But I will not sort of monopolize the conversation. We'll have this conversation another day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. We will now take one last question from Professor Shomadar.
Filip, I was thinking, something when you said that the city has grown so much and nobody could have expected that Kinshasa would have grown. So my question is slightly complicated, and let me see if I can put it simply. Am I right? Because I'm thinking of India, and I have no clue about the nationalist imagination of, let us say, someone like Lumumba or others about a national reconstruction, what happens to cities, etc. But if you take the Indian national government, then post-independence, the emphasis of the government, for good or bad, probably it was good, was more on villages. So in our first 2 5-year plans, for 10 years to 15 years, or 13, 14 years, certainly 2.5, the entire official emphasis was on reconstructing the villages, and cities were never thought of as problems. And nobody could think exactly as you speak of Kinshasa, that Mumbai, for example, would become what it is today. So can we say then that city has escaped the nation, that the growth of the cities and therefore the situation that you describe, and which I do not think is unique to Kinshasa, in a way, this huge explosion of population, this continuous growth of the city in terms of territory, population, everything, that has no correlation with the country to which it belongs. So therefore, it appears that as if this city, the problem, etc., it does not lend itself to the usual way in which we analyze and we think of the problem of transition, or the whole problematic of transition, that how does the city become democratic, or, etc. So will it be therefore good to, or will it be in a way, does it make sense to think then that we are far reaching a point, and I know it's a kind of a conjectural thing, that this is an absurd thing, meaning like Karachi belonging to or Jakarta belonging to Indonesia, these cities are in a way absurd in terms of belonging to the nations to which actually they belong. And therefore, we are fast approaching a time where from within the city, it is impossible. Whether you see it from the top of the high rise or from the hole, nothing can be done in between except that, like a rodent population, you always try to find out, make hole and see what you can find from that. So the only other alternative is that, and there is someone like Ashish Nandi, and there are actually very creative post-colonial thinkers who are saying that this break between the city and the country is something that has done disaster to the country. So Mumbai, for example, in the 90s, and I shall end here, and I want to have your response when you have Kinshasa in your mind, that Mumbai, when it was growing absurdly in the last decade of the last century and the first decade of this century, precisely at that time, there were countless hunger deaths in the villages of not even 200 kilometers away from the city. Nobody bothered. So you have the simultaneous reality of a completely diminishing and a perishing countryside, and at the same time, this kind of cancerous growth, what it seems to be, of what we are calling this kind of, metropolises within the southern world. And it seems that a solution from within is impossible, except that today or tomorrow, this disjunction, this distinction between the country and the city would have to be dissolved in one way or another. I don't know. I just, when we were giving the reply, so I was thinking that much of it resembles India, and Indian government after never thought that city would be a problem. They thought villages were a problem. Feudalism was a problem because you came to the question of class. So they were thinking industry was a problem. So how would you respond to this? I don't know what is the situation there. So.
A very interesting question. Also a very complicated one because it touches on many things. But the relationship between the city and the countryside is one that continues to be of an enormous importance. But in a way, you have to go back to the colonial period, where the city was really constructed as a place where you became a modern subject. And the village was seen as backward, as something that was belonging to a past that would disappear rapidly. So the city was a place to be, that skyrise, that was the pride of becoming a modern, and people themselves refer to it as we live in what they called Potomwindo, the black Europe or black Belgium. We are living in Belgium, but in Africa. And so even today there is still that very strong, even in discourse, people say when they leave their village to go to the city, I move upwards to the city. When you go back to the village, you go down to the village. So the city is up, the village is down, and that continues to be the case. In spite of the fact that once you arrive in this city, and a lot of people there's still a huge migratory influx from the countryside to the city for all kinds of reasons. The countryside by now has been left to rot on its own for decades. There is no road infrastructure. A large part of the hinterland of Congo cannot be reached by car. People have no access to hospitals, to medicine. A lot of that countryside, and certainly now with the war in Eastern Congo, is highly insecure. There's a lot of insecurity where the state is present in the form of soldiers and policemen. These people who are not controlled by the central state tax all of these villages for every chicken they have, every goat they own, and so on. So that in the end, these villages see no other way tend to move to the city to survive, or to cross the border into Angola or another neighboring country in search of a better life. So the countryside is in deep crisis now, I would say. There are very few people who actually know what is going on in that countryside. Anthropologists used to be good at that, but nobody does that anymore. Everybody stays close to his or her fridge in the city and does urban research. But and on the other hand, you have the city, in the space of the city, that is not evolving according to a kind of modernist or modern dream, but is rapidly ruralizing. People in case of Kinshasa have spoken of the villagization of the city, where it is actually very rural modes of living in terms of agricultural produce, in terms of even the re-ethnicization of the city. Before, in colonial times, the city was the place where you became an extra customary subject, where your own ethnic belonging, your own traditional background, your own ancestral values were of no matter anymore, and you became a modern citizen, an urban citizen. You see now that the city is rapidly re-ruralizing, in the sense that neighborhood after neighborhood is recomposed now along ethnic lines. And so I know, if you know the geography of the city, you know this part of town is Bakongo, this part is Baluba, and so on. That was never the case. So, and in terms of my own, it was never a conscious research strategy, but when I started working in Congo 40 years ago now, I worked for many, many years in a very distant rural community on the border with Angola. And it took me years before I slowly started to work my way from these villages, to first secondary towns, small cities, and then finally to the capital, Kinshasa. And that allowed me to see or to read the city, or access an urban network from the village. I used my rural networks, the families that I'd been living with, and those who had migrated to the city, and I explored the city from that rural perspective. And then you see how much rurality or rural moral matrices and ethics and economics and so on continue to give form to the city. And we tend to think of the city as the hard core of modernity, perhaps unfinished at its fringes in a kind of urban rural periphery, but it's actually the other way around. It's a rural that penetrates deep into the heart of the formal city and gives it a new kind of life. So you really have to understand and know about the rural in order to understand the urban. And so yes, there's a lot to discuss there, but that would be my response. And in terms of post-colonial theorists, you refer to Ashish Nandy, someone like Homi Bhabha, or someone like, on the Congolese case, Valentin Mudimbe, who talked about that post-colonial third space. Bhabha talks about it as a space, the in-between, the third space of creativity, where older pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial things mix and merge and give rise to new cultural expressions and so on. So for him, that space is a positive one, and Kinshasa, to some extent, is that too. It gave rise to a particular kind of urban culture that did not exist before, and that also it produced beautiful things. Think of its music. For many decades, Kinshasa was the pounding heart of the African music production, and its soukous made the whole continent dance. So it produced all of that aesthetics and urban popular culture. But for someone like Mudimbe, he will say, well, okay, all of that is well, but like the rodents you refer to, or the rats, it's a space not of creativity, but it's a space of alienation. This is a space that produces the slum. This is a space that produces poverty. This is a space that produces analphabetism. This is a space that produces all of these negative things. So Mudimbe has very often been read as a kind of, like Said, a kind of postmodern or post-colonial theorist, but actually he's not. He's a modernist that regrets that modernity did not take off in a way, and that's how I would read him. And he's true. He's right too. It's both, I think, and so in that sense, you can read that post-colonial theory according to these two genealogies too, as a positive or as a negative thing, and I think the city encompasses it both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your time. I'm sure many of the other participants might also have questions for you. So could we share your email ID with them?
Absolutely, with pleasure. So no problem at all. But I must add to that in 4 days from now, I'm traveling to Kinshasa, and I will be there for a month. And I can't promise beforehand that I will have a steady connection all the time, as the city is constantly another whole infrastructural hole is constantly experiencing electricity cuts, and so the Wi-Fi networks and so on are very shaky and unstable. So it might take a little while before I'm able to answer your questions online.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that wonderful presentation and for your time. So I shall now request the president of the Calcutta Research Group, Professor Sabyasachi Chaudhury, to deliver the concluding remarks for the course. To introduce the speaker, Professor Sabyasachi Chaudhury is a professor in the Department of Political Science at Rabindra Bharati University, Kolkata, and he's also the president of the Calcutta Research Group. He has been a visiting professor at Punjab University, Chandigarh, a visiting fellow at Dayton Law School, Ohio, and a Salzburg fellow. His research interests include global politics, South Asian politics, migration, democracy, and human rights in the global South. And he contributes regularly to academic journals, periodicals, dailies, news channels, and portals. Some of his notable publications include Sites of Statelessness, Lost Cities Seas. This is co-edited with Aishak Chaglar and Ranveer Shamadar. The Rohingya in South Asia, People Without a State, and Sustainability of Rights After Globalization. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, Modabunti. Thank you very much. So it has been a pleasure to listen to Professor Filip de Boeck. What could be a better kind of finale to this online course on urban futures in South and Southeast Asia, and which has been going on every Saturday since January this year, organized by the Calcutta Research Group, CRG, and the Center for Gender and Forced Displacement at the Asian Institute of Technology, AIT Bangkok, in collaboration with CIFAR, Canadian Institute for Advanced Studies. One of the primary objectives of this course was to offer a space for critical reflections on the rapidly transforming cities and urban lives, primarily of South and Southeast Asia. We had distinguished resource persons who initiated the discussion on every occasion, and also a diverse set of participants. And through their interaction, we could learn a lot over these weeks. And these participants were not only and resource persons not only from South and Southeast Asia, but also from beyond. So this year's course was divided into 6 modules, which dealt with the themes of economy, ecology, and political history of the cities, to plurality and cosmopolitanism, cultural and literary imagination, along with care and horizontal solidarities. Now, we began with the introductory remarks of Professor Ranveer Shamadar and Professor Paula Banerjee, followed by the keynote address by Professor Ash Amin of the University of Cambridge, who is also a CIFAR fellow. We also have had the opportunity to listen to a number of eminent scholars from Kathmandu, New Delhi, Kolkata, Mumbai, Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Manila, and elsewhere. Today, we just listened to the valedictory lecture by Professor Filip de Boeck, who is a professor of social and cultural anthropology at KU Leuven, Belgium, who is also, again, a CIFAR fellow. I strongly believe that anyone participating in this year's course must have gained valuable insights from these resource persons and their perspectives. Through this course, probably we learned quite about the location of racialized groups and communities within a geographical context of any city. It may be in South and Southeast Asia or elsewhere, like in Kinshasa. We have also come to know more about the emerging discourses associated with opportunities, social mobilities, and sometimes even transformations. After all, there is often an oversight of the nuances and intersections which exist within racialized groups, which run the risk of a homogenized perception by the scholars and policymakers. Adding to this complexity are particular geographical spaces and neighborhoods that are often conceptualized as landscapes of spatial anxiety. For instance, the minority lives or the Dalit lives in India and Nepal are necessarily geographic, but they also struggle with discourses that erase and despatialize their sense of place. In this context, an intervention on the part of the government, of the administration, to upgrade or beautify an area, a city, signals various attempts to bring the concerned area into alignment with what might be viewed as a more desirable or successful place to live. Therefore, one way of addressing the deprivation and stigma is to make it more like other, more desirable places. Secondly, to any one person, strangers are likely to be far more common in the big cities than her or his acquaintances. Thus, the paradigmatic characteristic of cities is that they are places where strangers regularly encounter one another in a variety of social spaces. It may be called the outside as a dimension of human experience. The understanding of the outside in this context and of relations, the strangers provides a particularly useful conceptual lens through which to critique contemporary city building practices. The inside in this context may appear as a dimension of human experience, again, evoking the domain of the psychological, of inner life, or the authentic self. It may also evoke a more familial sense of privacy and intimacy. This conception of self and of intimate relations has become the predominant focus of modern life. Close, warm, revelatory relations with others and presumed to be the genuinely human and morally privileged activity of the self. Thirdly, in the colonial paradigm, the city featured as a place of maybe worry governance, concealed violence, and suppressed terror. Indeed, if cities in the global north had often been regarded historically as structured, and more ordered signs of civility and modernity, the cradles of liberal democracy and the civic culture, the cities of the Indian subcontinent or South and Southeast Asia or the global south have more often been relegated to the other end of a developmental scale and dismissed as metropolises of mismanagement, excess, and overpopulation. However, with the turn of the 21st century, the somewhat ambivalence toward the city in the Indian nationalist public political discourses and more widely in international perceptions of India's cities was replaced by a more celebratory emphasis on the entrepreneurial or world-class global cities as the prime signifier of economic arrival. The so-called city of stasis started to be displaced by the city of action. As the essential objective of this new political discourse was to make, the cities of the global south sufficiently investment friendly, acceptable to the credit rating agencies, and help them emerge as geostrategic points to further neoliberalism, in the global south. Consequently, the current political dispensation in India and elsewhere has been quick to assimilate, if we can say, the neoliberal urban planning vocabulary of the global north in promoting investment hubs, cyber cities, and so-called smart cities. Urban regeneration programs, urban renewal programs, which include, in case of India, such as Skill India, Digital India, and so on and so forth, designed to make cities engines of growth. Further, it has also generated concerns over the appearance and infrastructural provision of the city, expressed most evidently in the clearance of informal settlements in preparation for a smart city. In other words, developmental and national governmental discourses about urban India, about the urban global south, have shifted from an ambivalent post-colonial modernizing vision of the city, focused largely on public nationalized projects, commons, and the kind of citizens it intended to create, to a conceptual investment in the city as a space of globally projected identity and public-private partnerships, PPPs, with the corporate or entrepreneurial worker as its focus. Over and above, cultural production is a vital part of imagining the city and has the potential to influence the understanding of the urban reality and reveal the city's complex structures, hierarchies of power, racialized and classed cartographies, and exclusive zoning. In these complexities of cities today, the most inhabitants of the cities may not have the real preferences, but simply desires that emerge in social interactions. I'm sorry. Last but definitely not the least, the late 19th century cities were the sites of industrial production, where factories smoked filled the air. Immigrant laborers were packed into suffocating hutments, slums, and the central business district symbolized corporate wealth. The railways transporting goods and road passengers converged in the heart of the downtown, as did streetcar lines from distant residential neighborhoods. Women in public were suspect at the turn of the century. If unaccompanied by a man, they were, considered to be sex workers. So that was the situation. That scenario has changed considerably in the early 21st century. No doubt. The women now go out of their houses more in number to earn their livelihood, to earn for their family, and for the other economic, social, and cultural needs and activities. Many women who are engaged in night duties in their offices or have to work through the nights as caregivers in private homes and hospitals, that is also a reality. Now, while women have reclaimed the right to the city economically, I would argue the spatial freedom they enjoy is often still dictated by the invisible boundaries of safety. Thank you very much. It's over to Madhubunti.
Thank you very much, sir. I would now request a few participants of the course to offer some closing remarks on what they think about the course, their views and experience. We shall begin with Asma Pudasaini. If you could please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Asma. I'm a graduate student at the Asian Institute of Technology. I'm currently doing my master's in development planning, and I'm from Nepal. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my experience. First of all, I would like to share my gratitude to Calcutta Research Group and Center on Gender and Forced Displacement for putting together this wonderful course. Over the past few weeks, we have looked at cities from multiple perspectives. It has made us reflect on many things. And when we learn about other cities, we can't help but contrast it to the cities that we're familiar with. I was born and raised in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, and I realized that there's so much about Kathmandu that I didn't really know and didn't really think about. What stood out for me personally in this course was about how migrants and refugees had shaped and continue to shape cities. Also, the issues and struggles in squatter settlements, which form a part of many cities in the world. I grew up next to a squatter settlement, and I realized that I'd never really looked in depth at the issues surrounding the squatter settlements in Kathmandu, and also the infrastructural challenges of growing cities, especially in the context of climate change and understanding cities through literature. It was really interesting to get perspectives from quite a few cities around the globe, like Jakarta, Kolkata, Delhi, Kinshasa, as well as the role of colonization in shaping cities. Overall, this course has played a key role in not just enhancing our knowledge, but also changing the way we look at cities. I think now when we travel to cities, we won't just see the buildings and the people walking by, but I think the lens that we use to see the city will be more holistic and more in-depth. Like who makes the cities, who keeps it running, what policies are prioritized by the metropolis, the similarities of the big cities of the world, their differences, their histories, and how do the residents see the future of the city, and who are the vulnerable groups within the city and other narratives surrounding the city. I think these are the things that we all participants will be looking at closely. It was also an enriching experience to learn from experts around Asia and beyond. I also love the flexibility of the assignment that was given to us, which allowed us to find creative ways to engage with the content. I decided to write a poem which I had not done in a long time. I wish we could also read each other's assignments that could maybe have helped us see the lessons from this course through different perspectives. I would also like to share the gratitude to the participants for an active engagement. I learned so much from the question and answer sessions at the end of each session. It's kind of sad that the course is ending now. I wish we all could have met like at least once physically. And I also think that since us participants are from diverse countries who grew up in diverse contexts, it might have been a great opportunity to interact and learn with one another in breakout rooms. Perhaps that's something the organizations could see too, maybe in the next course. Anyway, overall, the classes have been very insightful. All the speakers gave us something new to think about. As people who are already working in various areas, I think understanding the cities will definitely make us better planners, policymakers, researchers, entrepreneurs, or any other field that we're engaged in as cities cut across all areas. So lastly, I would like to thank Calcutta Research Group and Center on Gender and Forced Displacement once again for giving us this opportunity to learn about urban futures. We'll be looking forward for more courses in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Asma. Your suggestions have been noted. Thanks a lot. Next, we have Ishita Dostidar.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ishita. I'm from Bangladesh. I obtained my PhD on ethnic mobility and belongingness from Jahangirnagar University. And today I would like to share some reflections from the Bangladesh course, Urban Futures in South and Southeast Asia. The workshop created a space to explore innovative ideas for sustainable and resilient cities, particularly focusing on climate adaptation, mobility, and inclusive urban development. One of the most important lessons from the workshop was the need for collaborative and forward-thinking approaches to address urban challenges. Sessions repeatedly emphasizes that sustainable planning, community engagement, and innovation are essential for building the cities of the future. First, the workshop helped me to understand how global spaces evolve, particularly in the global south. Informality plays a significant role in shaping cities. Informal settlements are not simply marginal spaces, they are deeply connected to the political economy of cities. In many cases, informality becomes a mechanism through which inequalities are managed and everyday survival is negotiated. Another key discussion focused on disasters and urban vulnerability. We examined how both natural and human-made disasters affect urban areas. In South Asia especially, disasters can no longer be seen as purely natural events. Instead, vulnerability, resilience, and resistance are deeply interconnected with policy decisions, governance structures, and development strategies. Urban disaster management is dominated by policymakers and international donor agencies, which shapes those voices are heard and those vulnerabilities remain invisible. The workshop also explores how literature, art, and cultural imagination influence our understanding of cities. Through discussions about cities such as Delhi and Basu, we reflected on how narratives shape urban identities. For instance, the contrast between Delhi's slum dwellers and its ruling classes reveals how history, politics, romance, and migration all contribute to the city's evolution. Similarly, we also have learned that how global cultural influence of the Korean Hallyu movement shows that cultural success is not accidental. It is the result of strategic investments in technology and culture by the South Korean government and private corporations strengthening the country's global soft power. Another important discussion I've learned concerning the urban redevelopment and planning. In many cities, redevelopment plans often produce that scholars call structural violence. For example, proposed redevelopment in areas such as Kamathipura has already caused fear and uncertainty among residents, even when such plans are not fully implemented. These plans shape urban aspirations and futures while threatening the livelihoods of vulnerable communities. We also learn how transnational actors influence urban climate policies. How climate resilience is increasingly shaped by funding mechanism, investment tools, and hybrid public-private partnerships. This raises important questions about the policies of disasters and how global actors influence local urban decisions. Overall, the workshop highlighted how development policies often produce cities that appear ordinary in everyday life, yet driven deeply contested spaces. Excuse me. Conflicts over land, labor exploitation, and unequal infrastructures reveal the underlying inequalities of urban development. Migration was another important topic. Migrants, refugees, and other outsiders often make cities more diverse and cosmopolitan. At the same time, their presence can generate tensions with nationalist or nativist movements. We discussed whether strengthening secondary cities could reduce forced migration or whether it simply shifts existing forms or urban inequalities and patriarchy. For me personally, attending this course significantly reshaped my understanding of urban space. Academically, Dhaka is often categorized as a city of the global south. It in everyday life, it sometimes feels like a white village. This idea is not meant as criticism, rather it reflects how rural social practices continue to shape urban life even within rapidly expanding metropolis. From an anthropological perspective, Dhaka exists between multiple identities, urban and rural, formal and informal, modern and traditional. These overlapping realities challenge conventional definitions of what a city is supposed to be. So I want to thanks again the organizers for giving me such wonderful opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ishita. The next participant is Hanif.
First of all, good evening, everyone. Allow me to introduce myself once again. My name is Hanif Zaimar Rahman, and I'm coming from Indonesia. And also, I'm the participant of the Winter Workshop Urban Futures in South and Southeast Asia. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to AIT, Asian Institute of Technology, Calcutta Research Group, and also all members of the organizing committee for giving me the opportunity to participate in this wonderful and enriching program. Throughout this course, I have learned many things about cities and urban dynamics. We explore how the concept of the city and urban are distinct yet closely interconnected. Understanding this concept is important for analyzing the dynamic of our regions, which are deeply related to the power relations, historical context, cultural diversity, and also development process. Studying urban areas also reveals the inequality that exists between the global north and also the global south. For a long time, the global south has often been perceived as less in shaping global development. However, in reality, cities in the global south are developing rapidly in many aspects, including economically, socially, and also politically. This shows that despite facing many challenges, the growth and transformations of urban areas in the global south should never be underestimated. And lastly, participating in this workshop has truly sharpened and broadened my understanding of urban studies. For me personally, this workshop has changed the way I see urban and cities, not only as a physical spaces, but also as a places shaped by history, power, and also human experience. Furthermore, I grew in the largest urban space in Indonesia called Jabodetabek. So Jabodetabek is the acronym from city around the capital city like Jakarta, Bogor, Depok, Tangerang, and also my hometown Bekasi. And when I study these urban spaces and cities, I realized that there are actually many inequalities happens, especially in my hometowns. I saw when I was young, I live in a privileged way where I live in the most advanced places in the country because I live near from the capital city where all the infrastructure is built very advanced compared to the other place. But when I learned about these studies, I realized that even though Bekasi is one of the biggest, the largest city in Indonesia, but it has so many problems and also inequality that happens in our city, in my city. That's why it's very interesting study, and I really grateful for participating in these courses, and not to mention about all the inspiring speaker from different part of the world, and I can exchange the ideas with fellow participants from diverse background. It is a very, very interesting study, and also it has been a truly meaningful and valuable experience for me. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanif. Finally, we have Paras.
Hi, I'm Paras Kumar. I'm doing a master's in modern Indian studies from University of Göttingen in Germany, and I'm writing my thesis on how displacement and eviction of slum cluster affects educational trajectories of young students. And I think the reason why I decided to join this course, Urban Future in South and South Asia, was that I didn't have a bachelor or master's in urban studies, so I wanted to, get myself into urban studies and to think more on the questions regarding urban and urbanization. So that was one of my motivations to attend. And I think I'm really happy because it is one of the most diverse online class that I have ever attended, even despite being in Germany, because they are from students from Myanmar, Bangladesh, Philippines, India, Mexico. So that was really interesting and useful for me to hear the questions that they raise and the viewpoints. That was really interesting. And there were times where I thought okay, why did I not think in this way? For example, today, Professor Filip de Boeck came up with this idea of fall as a conceptualizations. And I was okay, I have seen in India and growing up, why did I not even think of this as a way to understand, urban processes, practices? So in these things, it was interesting. Even for example, today, Professor Paula Banerjee also raised whole in terms of gender. So these are the things that really, really helped me and motivated me to think more critically and creatively. So that was really interesting. And another thing was there were different topics, right? Migrants, disasters, literally imaginations, K-pop, urban economy. Though it was really helpful for me to understand. However, one of the issue that I face was that the way the course is designed, I couldn't find if there's a continuity, right? The last lecture that we had and today this lecture we had. So that was the thing that I felt though it's important that it was diverse and we catch up on different issues, but for me it was in a sense difficult to follow on to the previous lectures that we had and then this one. So I think a more depth and focused course design would have been helpful if we particularly focused on one aspect. But I understand it's also important to look at many other things. And lastly, I would just like to thank the environment that we got from organizers. That was really helpful, and the support.
Thank you very much, Paras. Again, your suggestions have been noted. Finally, I would now request Dr. Priya Singh to kindly offer the formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Priyadi.
Thank you, Madhubhanti, and a very good evening. I'll make it very short because most of our resource persons and participants wish to leave. On behalf of the organizers, that is the Calcutta Research Group and the Center on Gender and Forced Displacement at the Asian Institute of Technology, we wish to thank all the resource persons for sharing their reflections, their knowledge on the myriad aspects and characteristics of urban spaces and urban living. Thank you very much to all of them. A very big thank you to all the participants for their sustained engagement. They've been present, they've been extremely active in engaging and carrying the conversations forward. In particular, Professor Filip de Boeck, thank you so much for, kind of providing the absolute appropriate finale, if I may say so, for the workshop. Thank you, a very big sincere gratitude to Professor Ranbir Shaumaddar and Professor Paula Banerjee for providing the intellectual conceptualization of the theme of the conference, of the workshop. Thank you so much. And of course, to the 3-member team behind organizing this workshop, Dr. Shaumata Biswas, who's not here with us today, but she has been coordinating the workshop. So a big thank you to her, to Madhubhanti and CIFAR for doing all the work. Thank you very much. If I've missed out on anybody, my apologies. Of course, a big thank you to IDRC and CIFAR, our partners for the workshop. Thank you very much. A very good evening, and we hope to stay connected with each other. Thank you very much.